Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. My name is Ashley Sloat and I am the president of Aurora Consulting. And today we will be talking about digital health and more specifically avoiding short-circuiting in the digital health revolution. So first we will go through a brief introduction about Aurora and about digital health. We will then proceed into describing digital health company characteristics and then challenges that digital health companies face and hopefully wrap it up so you understand how to avoid these pitfalls. So first, the introduction. Aurora Consulting is a patent strategy firm. We help clients, early stage companies and small companies develop a patent portfolio, and that includes patent strategy, patent drafting services, prosecution. And so together, Kristen Wolf and I do all this client-facing work to really help our clients build a successful and valuable patent portfolio. So if you'd like to talk to us more, please visit our website and send us a message. So on to digital health. Digital health is all around us. There are devices that integrate into clothing. There are smart toothbrushes, devices to measure babies both in the womb and elsewhere, devices that can even be inserted in the inner ear to measure temperature, for example, or devices that can be worn as rings or on the wrist to measure sleep and activity. So the reason we're focusing on digital health today is that this is one of Aurora's main areas of practice. We have a significant number of digital health clients, and so we consider ourselves to be somewhat experts in this space for patent strategy. So taking a step back, what is digital health? It is the use of information and communications technologies to improve human health, healthcare services, and wellness for individuals and across populations. And this is according to the National Institutes of Health and the National Center for Biotechnology Information. There are four major subcategories of digital health. There is the electronic health record or electronic medical record, EHR, EMR, and this is basically giving consumers the ability to access their health information on an online interface. Telehealth, which gives the consumer the ability to interact with a physician outside of the office. There is also mobile health, which is the practice of medicine and public health supported by mobile devices. So that may mean a consumer is able to measure certain physiological signals away from the office and then transmit that data to an electronic health record or to a physician. And then wireless health, that is integration of wireless technology into traditional medicine. So again, this may be measuring certain physiological signals or monitoring chronic conditions or performing diagnosis using digital health devices. And so this may mean that you're, again, measuring physiological signals and then making these decisions. And so as you can see, there is some overlap between mobile health and wireless health, but overall these are all very tightly integrated. So as you can imagine, digital health is a rapidly growing market. As shown here, this is the market value in billions of US dollars on the y-axis and the year on the x-axis. And each of those subcategories I just described are shown here. The total is shown in green, and as you can see, it has been increasing over the past few years and is expected to continue to increase. But despite this healthy market, greater than 50% of digital health companies will fail in the first 20 months. And so this is the short-circuiting that I'm telling you about. So why are they failing and how can you avoid it? And that's what we will be discussing today. We'll be talking about digital health company characteristics, so what makes these companies unique. And then we'll also be talking about different challenges that they face as they try to make their startup into something real. So digital health spans several worlds, and that also is what brings some of these challenges into their purview. So digital health spans the software, devices, and healthcare space, and it's particularly this healthcare space that brings a lot of issues into digital health companies. They are regulated by multiple governing bodies. They also must manage their data analysis because they acquire a large volume of data over time. If you can imagine how much data is acquired from just one user over one day, now multiply that by thousands or millions of users over months or years, and the amount of data is just staggering. So how do they analyze all that data and provide something meaningful to consumers? They also must manage data security and anonymity for sensitive health data. Again, this is your health data, and so nobody really wants that shared with unknown persons. These companies are also maybe heavily subsidized since digital health was part of the 2009 stimulus. And another interesting piece that is not necessarily unique to digital health, but it's not necessarily widespread either. The direct consumer or the direct customer is not necessarily the end user of the technology. So think about it this way. If I am using the technology as a patient, I'm not necessarily paying for the use of that technology. An insurance provider or my employer or somebody else may be paying for my use of that technology. And so as a digital health company, you need to make sure both of those end users are happy with the technology and want to reimburse for it and want to use it. Lastly, trust and credibility are paramount. Obviously, you want to trust who you buy your car from or who you rent your house from, but that amount of trust is unparalleled to that which is required in the health space. People really want to trust and use credible services, and so they're not going to use your product if they feel like you're untrustworthy or if the data you're providing is not credible. So these are just a few digital health company characteristics. So now let's move on into the challenges that digital health companies face. So digital health companies are regulated by multiple governing bodies, as I mentioned. There are some interesting issues around intellectual property protection. They have data access and security issues to consider and adoption and monetization issues. So let's first talk about these governing bodies. So digital health companies may be regulated by the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. For example, if the company is transmitting protected health information between users, maybe between different platforms, between the cloud and a device, or to electronic health record, HIPAA very well may come into play. There's also the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, or HITECH Act. This governs health information shared with medical providers. So if you're transmitting health information to an EHR, EMR, or directly to a medical provider, you likely will fall under the HITECH Act. And together, so these both protects transmission of information, especially health information. There's claims that there's not a lot of overlap between these two, but if we know anything about it, there's likely some overlap. And there are penalties for willful neglect of these two acts, and so make sure that you participate lawfully in these acts if they apply to you. There's obviously also the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. So currently there's no regulation of general wellness products. So that's those products that maybe measure activity, give you general feedback about your well-being. But those that are more invasive or implanted or interventional, provide a treatment or provide a diagnosis, very well will be regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So for instance, if you are diagnosing heart failure or diabetes or heart attack or even maybe labor, you very well may fall under the FDA's purview. And further, there may be more regulation in our future. There's been some discussion around how to better regulate digital health products for efficacy and safety, and so we very well may see more regulations popping up in the future. Digital health companies may also be regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC. The FTC requires that companies notify users if there is a breach in data access. And this obviously is very important for digital health companies because people want to know when their health data is secure and when it's not secure. They also review claims of functionality and outcomes. A recent example of this was Lumosity, where the FTC thought that their claims about brain training, decreasing age-related decline were unsubstantiated, and it turns out that that was the case. And so the FTC and Lumosity settled out of court, and hopefully we will be seeing some additional studies now where Lumosity can hopefully prove their claims so they can get back out in the market with those kinds of claims. Digital health companies may also be regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC regulates communications devices. For example, they have certification rules around radio frequency equipment. And they also have started a Connect to Health FCC task force to further investigate how they may regulate digital health companies. And lastly, there is state and local governments. Each government and state may have differing rules for regulation of the healthcare industry. One particular area of interest for many states and governments is preventing medical professionals from practicing medicine with unlicensed individuals. So if you're using the help of various medical professionals in your app or in your digital health software or device, you have to make sure you subscribe to those laws and follow those laws if you are unlicensed, which I imagine many of the digital health individuals are. So that's just a few examples about different regulating bodies and making sure that you figure out which ones are regulating the digital health company, and so you can subscribe to their laws and not get in trouble. So there's also some interesting issues around their eligibility for protecting intellectual property. So as many of you know, there is a range of types of intellectual property protection that is available. There are utility patents, design patents, copyright, trade secret, and obviously do nothing. And in my opinion, the best one is utility patents, and the worst is obviously to do nothing. And I'll describe each of these briefly in turn and some positives and negatives of each of them. So utility patents protect the functioning of a technology. As many of you know, they must meet the 101 requirement, which means it has to be a process, machine, manufacturer, or composition, which obviously digital health is. However, the courts have long held there is an inherent exception to this rule. That exception is abstract ideas, natural phenomenon, laws of nature. And so in some cases, software is viewed as an abstract idea. And so in those cases, you have to make sure you include something more, which I know sounds very vague, but we've been trying to decode what that means, and we've been successful in various realms. And so if you're receiving these kinds of rejections, seek us out and hopefully we can help you. Lastly, must be novel and non-obvious. Basically, it cannot be previously publicly described. So as many of you know, there was the dreaded Alice decision in 2014, Alice versus CLS Bank, which I know many of you have heard about ad nauseum. So shortly thereafter, there was only a 50% allowance rate of applications that had a previous 101 rejection, so a very low allowance rate. And a lot of people were freaking out in the digital health and software spaces. But now, 2 years later, we're actually doing much better with an allowance rate of over 80%. So things are definitely looking up, and people are a lot more positive. So how do you get allowance of applications with 101 rejections? Some general factors that weigh in favor of patentability include the software being tied to a specific device, not a general purpose computer. So for example, if your software runs on a watch or is some kind of cuff or some kind of patch, try to tie that software to that specific device. The software needs to transform data into a different state or thing. So maybe taking physiological signals and transforming them into a message or some other information. It needs to solve a problem rooted in computers or the internet. So how does maybe some kind of back end feature of your digital health software also solves a problem rooted in computers or the internet? And lastly, there should be a clear problem solution statement in the application. So these are just a few factors. This isn't necessarily a bulletproof list, but just some guidance. Next, there are design patents. These protect the ornamental design of a product. For example, in software, you may use them to protect the user interface layer. For a device, obviously the device appearance. They must be novel and non-obvious, just like utility patents, but there is no Section 101 requirement because obviously design is pretty tangible. An example of design patents are Apple's Springboard, Facebook's landing page or general layout, and then for Google, it's their search page. And so you can see it's relatively easy to get design patents. These are pretty basic. You can see that anything in solid line is what's patented, and anything in the dashed is not. And they're also relatively cheap to get. So great backup plan for if you can't get a utility. Another option is copyright. So these cover the particular expression of an idea, not the idea itself. Must be an original work fixed in a tangible medium, and it requires public disclosure of the code. So some advantages and disadvantages are that it's easier, faster, and cheaper than patents. They're granted immediately upon creation, and registration is very cheap. Disadvantages are that it only covers that particular expression, not the idea itself. The idea itself is more for a utility patent, for example. And there's There's also a potential defense by infringers. It's called the fair use doctrine if they're using a very small amount or maybe for educational purposes, or there's other rationale as well. They may be able to use it without infringing it. An example of copywriting software, the Java API taxonomy is copyrightable as decided in 2014. Next, there is trade secret. So trade secret can protect any information that derives economic value from not being generally known and is subject to reasonable efforts to be kept secret. So for example, customer lists or maybe internal software are good examples. And you have to take reasonable efforts to keep it secret. You can't just decide today for it to be trade secreted and not yesterday. You have to instill measures and different protocols to keep it secret. So as I just said, this is best for source code, internal software, and other code that is neither publicly available nor easily reverse engineered. Some advantages are that there's no public disclosure requirement and there's no formal process or filing fees, because obviously you have to keep it confidential. Disadvantages are there is no recourse if somebody independently creates substantially similar software or reverse engineers your software. The only recourse is if somebody misappropriates it, which means maybe they steal it, they disclose it to somebody that they shouldn't have, something along those lines. How do you take reasonable efforts to keep it secret? Well, you can mark documents as confidential. You can require third-party access, third parties with access to sign NDAs. You can require all employees to sign confidentiality agreements. You can have a strong document retention policy. You can also establish reasonable physical security measures like door locks and passcodes on computers. You can also set access controls on code repositories. And lastly, do nothing is not a great option, but sometimes you just have to be faster and better than everybody else. So now that you know a little bit about the different regulating bodies and some IP issues, or some options at least, let's talk about data access and security. So 46% of consumers of digital health say digital health data is not incorporated into their healthcare. So why is that? One of the leading issues is that there is poor integration with legacy systems. There's poor data interoperability. As you can imagine, if you're integrating with hospitals, many hospitals have their own system. They're using particular devices and software. Maybe they have their own special software. And so how do you get data into these places? How do you share data with these legacy systems? How do you integrate with them? And that's a huge issue. There's also just integration with existing IoT devices. How do you get integrated with all these different devices and systems? Further, about 80% of digital health data is unstructured or uncategorized, so it's difficult to find the relevant data. And so how do you distill the data down to relevant information? And so another challenge of a digital health company is taking data and distilling it down to something meaningful that they can provide to consumers, to end payers, and that will lead to better adoption, right? If you're going to take this data, people want to know something about themselves as a result. So, I know some companies use AI now, machine learning to help with this issue, but I think we're still just the tip of the iceberg with figuring out how to use all this data. Also, digital health data security. How is data securely transferred from point A to point B? How do you transfer to the cloud, to other IoT devices, or receive from other IoT devices and involve mobile? One thing a digital health company may want to do is perform a risk analysis and determine where sensitive data is received, maintained, transmitted, and disposed of. This will allow them to identify anticipated threats and hopefully plug those holes before they become an issue. Lastly, digital health companies need to be concerned about proving data that is from one individual versus another. How do you ensure that when electrophysiological signals are received, that they're actually from your patient and not from a nephew or a son or somebody else? Because obviously you want that data to be accurate so that you can provide the best healthcare possible. But if that data is from another user, well then that efficacy is going to be significantly reduced. And lastly, adoption and monetization. So digital health adoption is driven by efficacy, efficiency, risk management, and user engagement. So for efficacy, drive satisfaction in reimbursement. So really make sure that you have some efficacy data. either force yourself to go through the FDA, which actually may reduce competitors in your space, or do some other little trials that can help prove that it's as efficacious as you say it is. And this will also help with reimbursement, because insurance companies are not going to reimburse a product that is not time tested. Efficiency: increase the number of patients being served with the same resources. As the needs of the population increase because we have so many individuals, ideally digital health will help serve a larger number of patients with the same resources or reduced resources. And so how does your digital health technology achieve this? Risk management, give providers the ability to be more active participants in their patients' outcome. This way, they can take more of a stake in the patient's outcome, which will hopefully drive healthier patients. And lastly, there's user engagement. You really want people to have engagement in their health, and this will result in better health over time, better insurance reimbursement, and then build relationships between consumers and their employers, insurance companies, to help them drive better health. So that's how you get good adoption. And sometimes, again, another feature of this is gamification, incentivizing, tapping into social media, social circles, and really getting users engaged. There's also monetization. More than 90% of mobile health applications are free, so how to monetize? You may sell a device, but if you only have software, maybe you are selling a subscription. There's also maybe pay for performance, where certain groups or insurance companies may pay for performance of your application. If so many users start leading a healthier lifestyle as a result, or have reduced bouts of their condition, you may receive payment in that way. Or a fee for service, which is the classical insurance model, where you receive the service and then the insurance company pays. So you also need to understand who is the user, who is paying for it, and who has the incentive, and that will help you figure out how to monetize it, because at the end of the day, you have to make sure all those individuals, whether they're one individual or several, you have to make sure they're all happy. So despite all of these challenges, there's huge venture funding in digital health. And so how do you avoid being one of the 50% that fail in the first 20 months? Well, know the challenges specific to the type of technology before embarking on your journey. So review all these slides I sent to you today, or you're viewing today, and really know what kind of challenges you're going to face. And also review successes and failures of companies in your similar space or with similar technology and functionality, and see where did they fail and what you can do better. And hopefully you won't be one of those 50%. So thanks for joining me today, and please give us a call if you'd like to work with us, because we'd like to work with you.